They say that life comes at you really quickly, and that can be applied to multiple things. Could be applied to this beautiful sport of college football. It could even be applied to in the game of life. I remember when Colorado was relevant, and that reminds me of a little story that, I wanted to tell you guys from yesterday, right? I was putting the show together, putting the notes in, and once I have all my notes taken care of and all my ducks in a row, I thought to myself, okay, it's time to go grab some food real quick, and then we're going to record this pod, right? Like, sounds good. Got to get some Taco Bell. Shout out to the family members that got me some Taco Bell gift cards, among other things, this Christmas. And we're on the drive to Taco Bell. It's not a very far drive, just 5-10 minutes tops away from my house, right? And while I'm waiting in line at Taco Bell to pick up my, my nacho fry box, I get an ESPN alert, and this ESPN alert is followed by some text messages in my content creator group chat. It's also followed by some other messages that I see in my Discord for my larger gaming channel. And that being said, I finally get my Taco Bell and I'm at a red light. So I have a chance to finally like, okay, let me check my phone to see like all this buzz is about. And I see that it's the news that Nick Saban has officially retired as the head coach of Alabama. So instead of me recording this on the 10th, I'm recording this on the 11th. And I had to show that story, it's because it's one of those moments in college football where it's looked upon as a definitive end of an era for sure. People are going to look at that 2023-2024 break and say, okay, 2023 is the end of this era that we're in, and 2024 is going to be the representation of a new era. We've seen coaching icons like Nick Saban retiring from the college football ranks. We also see the end of the Pac-12 in this era of super conferences with the SEC and the Big Ten having 16 plus teams. The Power Five model is long gone at this point, at least in the eyes of how I see things with modern college football realignment. But I also mentioned that story because it's one of those moments in college football history. It's that I'm not sure about it with you guys necessarily, but it's also for one of the moments where you just kind of know where you were when it happened. It just feels like one of these era defining moments that is going to create massive cascades in college football moving forward. I mean, we are talking about a legend stepping away from the game, and this is a coach that, for all intents purposes, it would be different if he was towards the end of the rope. This is not necessarily the same as maybe a Joe Paterno. With Joe Paterno, wasn't really at his peak by the time he ultimately was forced to step down. Nick Saban, for all intents purposes, um, there really was no drop from the peak of Alabama football. Sure, they have gone a couple of years without winning a national championship, but for all intents purposes, from the time that he stepped on campus originally in 2007, after he failed in his attempts to coach in the NFL for the Miami Dolphins until this year of retirement, there was only 1 year in which Alabama did not have a double-digit win season, and it was that 2007 season when he had to build a program from really the shadows of Bear Bryant. I remember a story talked about on the Late Kick show when he called an emergency podcast in light of the retirement of Nick Saban. And he was telling the story about how Alabama, for some years now, they've been this kind of living in the shadow of Bear Bryant. And they've kind of lived in this predicament of, well, if you weren't really affiliated with Bear Bryant, you really couldn't be affiliated with this program in any major way. And so Nick Saban comes in, he changes the mentality of that Alabama program, and the rest is history. And I come on here today because I talk about, I'm certainly someone that could acknowledge that has certainly that SEC fatigue, right? That has that bias against the SEC at times, even though I can acknowledge that, okay, the SEC this year, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts, the SEC is probably the best conference from top to bottom, and SEC probably had one of the best bowl seasons in any conference in college football, at least in that high Division I level. And that was really formulated in how I felt about Alabama. I really did not like Alabama in the years I've grown up, and it was always a field day when we saw Alabama lose. And I'm sure many folks outside of the state of Alabama or didn't root for the Alabama Crimson Tide felt the same way. But with that being said, it doesn't change the critical fact that Nick Saban was one heck of a coach. This is going to be a coach that could very well go down, at least in our generation, in this 2000s and 2010s, as one of the best coaches of all time. I think he has a serious argument. This is a person, well, at the University of Alabama, he goes 206 and 29. So he was there for 17 seasons. 17 seasons this man was at the University of Alabama, and he did not even lose 30 games. So less than 2 losses a year. That's an incredible longevity in terms of what Nick Saban was able to accomplish at the University of Alabama. Not to mention, he has 6 national championships to his name. All 6 of those national championships coming in the span of 7 years. And also, not to mention, the bowl record that he was able to amass, 16-7. He went to a bowl game in every single year that he was at the University of Alabama. And he ends up going, I believe it was 12-4, technically 11-4 if you count for the fact that the NCAA did adjust his record, did vacate 5 of the 7 wins that Alabama did get in 2007, but it doesn't change the fact that those games did indeed happen on the field. And the next thing that I thought about is, after reminiscing about really the greatness of Nick Saban, you don't have to like Nick Saban. You don't have to like Alabama. I'm certainly in that camp, but I'm not a fan of the Alabama Crimson Tide program. But I do respect it. I have immense respect for what Nick Saban has been able to accomplish. I have immense respect for the longevity of Alabama remaining at the top or close to the pinnacle of this sport for such a long period of time. Because it's different in pro sports where you're able to keep a duo together for 10, 15 years plus, and they can be on top for a very long time. When you're turning over at least a quarter of your roster every year, it is hard to remain on top. And so to be able to have the longevity that Nick Saban has had, major kudos to Nick Saban in that regard. But after we took some time to think about, really reflecting on the legacy of Nick Saban, the next question, the inevitable question that comes up is, who's going to take over this Alabama job? And with the Alabama job coming open for the first time in nearly a couple of decades, you have to think to yourself, like, who could possibly be a favorite, for that said Alabama job? I think personally, almost anyone is on the table. There, contrary to popular belief, while many fans would probably steer on the side of, I would not want to be the legend, the person to fill the shoes of a legend, because those are truly hard shoes to fill. I would not wish that upon anybody. That is some humongous expectations that are going to be down there at Tuscaloosa, Alabama, regardless of who ends up taking the job down the line. But there's a lot of head coaches out there that maybe even privately are thinking themselves as alpha men, that I would love that opportunity, that I would love to show that I can handle those expectations and keep Alabama at the pinnacle of this sport. And so I look around of the national landscape, and regardless of who Alabama decides to hire, it's going to create this cascading effect. It's going to create some massive dominoes to fall, because you would imagine that there's a lot of good coaches out there. There's a lot of very good coaches out there. And so I'm looking at, as someone from the state of Ohio, looking at this Alabama job, I think there really is only 2 people that I would not be shocked if they declined the invitation to take the Alabama head coaching job. Kirby Smart at Georgia, And I would venture to argue Dabo Swinney at Clemson, mainly because those two guys were able to both win national championships at their current school. When you really look down the list, I think everyone else is fair game, and Alabama is certainly going to have their picks. So I don't think that this coaching opportunity, I don't think this vacancy is going to last very long. I would not even be shocked if we end up finding ourselves in a situation to where we might know who the next coach at Alabama is going to be. It might even be before this podcast even comes out. I would say bare minimum, the next time that you see a podcast from this YouTube channel, we will probably know who's going to be the next head coach at Alabama. And those ramifications are going to be felt throughout the country, regardless of who we go. So, going to be very intriguing to see who ends up taking that job. I've heard Dan Lanning and I've heard, Lane Kiffin being linked to that job, but certainly nothing has been confirmed since I have started recording this. And I haven't seen any new ESPN notification saying otherwise. But it just goes to show some people like to throw around that O word. I'm not going to say it. When I tried to say it in the preseason, it almost made me vomit. But there is no such thing as that O word. No, what I like to say is we're in a period right now where there's a longer period of time between when the last college football game has happened and when the next college football game is supposed to take place. I kind of operate under that standpoint, but even in this longer period of time between when the last game and the next game is supposed to take place, there is still quite a bit to talk about. And it just goes to show why we have quite a jammed packed podcast for you guys here tonight. And I hope you guys are excited for what is to come after we finish talking about Nick Saban here. I hope you guys are excited for what else that we have in store on this podcast tonight. And if you guys are excited for it as well, I need you guys to go ahead and do me a massive favor. Go ahead, hit that like button, because what that allows me to do is that it makes me stand out a little bit more in the YouTube algorithm. And it helps get this out to more college football fans like yourself. And if you're watching this right now, I would imagine you are indeed a college football fan. In addition, if you're brand new and you like what you see here on this channel, I also would encourage you to hit that subscribe button. We may be in what some people like to use that O word, but that doesn't mean we have to stop talking about college football. Far from it. This is something that I want to try and do year round. Granted, we may not be as active as what we are during the course of the when many of the games are played on the football field. So if that's something that sounds good to you, and you like a college football channel that kind of looks at the college football landscape from that 50,000 feet standpoint, because we're not afraid to talk about other conferences as well. We show love to smaller conferences as well. I definitely encourage you to hit that subscribe button. It would mean the absolute world to me. And speaking of those games that happened on the field, we did have, it feels like forever, but the national championship game just happened Monday, just a few days ago. It feels like forever with all this news coming out in terms of everything else that's going on in our college football world. But guys, there's a national championship game that happened just a few days ago. And we did see what happened in a national championship game. We saw Michigan win their very first national championship game since 1997. To give you guys some context for how long ago that was, last time Michigan actually won the national championship game, I was not alive. I was legitimately not alive. I was actually born a couple of months after the national championship game took place, but this is the first time since 1997 that Michigan did say that they are at the top of the sport, that they are currently at the pinnacle right now. Michigan did end up winning. It looks convincingly 34-13. I will say, though, that this is a type of game where the game overall was a little bit closer than what the final score would indicate in my mind. Now, if you watch the first quarter, quarter and a half, you didn't think that it was going to end that way because Michigan, and Michigan, to all the credit in the world to the Michigan Wolverines, they ran all over Washington in this one. And Michigan was able to be more physical against an Alabama team that is used to being to out physical other squads. So Michigan beats them in an overtime game, and they use that same kind of logic for say in order to out physical Washington. And it was a huge discrepancy in how Michigan was able to run the ball versus how Washington was able to run the football. Michigan ends up running for over 300 yards. They average 8 yards a carry, by the way, while Washington struggled to even amass 50 yards. So they couldn't even get a sixth of what Michigan was able to accomplish on the ground. And a part of that is that Washington did not have their full arsenal in the running game. Dylan Johnson, who has had an excellent season, he ran for over 150 yards in the Pac-12 championship game, really helped propel the Washington Huskies into the college football playoff in the first place, was a good supporting piece for Michael Penix. Well, he was limited. He was someone that got hurt in the Texas game, was a game time decision, actually did end up playing, but it was clear that he was not himself. He only averaged 3 yards a carry. He ran for 34 yards off of 11 carries in that national championship game. So Washington was absolutely bottled up, and they lost in the trenches. And that was evident in that first quarter and a half that Washington was frankly dominated. It was 17-3 at one point, but I do also have to give credit to this Washington squad. They never give up, even though seemed like that Michael Penix didn't necessarily have his fastball in this national championship game. Now, when we talked about this national championship game, I said that I figured Michigan would win, but I thought Michael Penix could at least keep it close. But for Washington to pull this out and win outright, Washington really needed Michael Penix to have the type of game that he had in, for example, the Texas game. And the stats that he put in that Texas game really don't do it any justice. Yes, he threw for over 400 yards and he threw for multiple touchdown passes. But what he also did was Michael Penix Jr. was making multiple off-platform throws. He was making multiple intermediate completions. He was playing at an extraordinarily high level to get Washington in to this national championship game. And even then, it still almost was not enough. It came down to that very last play of the game where one of the DBs made an excellent play on the ball to help seal a Sugar Bowl victory for the Washington Huskies. And it's not that Penix had a terrible day. He did complete more than half his passes. He did throw for 250 yards, had a touchdown, but he threw multiple picks. Now, one of those picks was not his fault. The first pick that happened in the third quarter, first drive of the second half, by the way, and this was a real turning point in this game as well. You guys would remember he got pressured in the pocket. He couldn't step up. He tried to throw the ball away. He was going to make a good decision trying to throw that football away, and he couldn't get enough under it. And DBs for Michigan, all credit the world to those Michigan DBs who did their job. The Michigan DBs had to slow down this passing attack, and they did. They really did. Made a big play on the ball, and then fourth quarter, Penix desperately trying to get Washington back into the game, throws a second interception. There was also a big fourth down in that first half that Penix had Ndunze wide butt naked open as well. And it wasn't a perfect throw by any. It was catchable, but it's not the type of caliber throw that you would typically see from Michael Penix Jr. So he misses that throw. So those were really defining moments. And of course, eventually, Michigan does end up pulling away. They do end up getting 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. and that ultimately seals Washington's fate. That's how Michigan ends up winning this national championship. One more thing that I do want to talk about before I talk into what could possibly happen with all the things that's happening off the field for Michigan is JJ McCarthy didn't have to do much in this game at all. He only had 170 yards of total offense. He had a very modest stat line, if we're going to be honest here, right? So JJ McCarthy ends up going 10 for 18, 140 yards. He also carried the ball a few times, 4 times for 31 yards. And it makes you wonder, right? Just with what happened with Florida State. And I know some people already made this point already, but I definitely wanted to bring this up. So Florida State, who was an undefeated team, was kept out of the playoff because they were concerned about the quarterback play. But yet, Michigan just showed that you don't have to have necessarily elite play from the quarterback position in order to win a national championship. JJ McCarthy is the perfect example of that. Now, could have JJ McCarthy thrown the ball more times and maybe his stat line would look prettier? Sure. But I think one of the best traits that you could have as an offensive coordinator is sticking with what works. And if you're running the ball extremely well, it's kind of like the Penn State approach, right? In the Penn State game, particularly in the second half, JJ McCarthy did not even attempt a single pass in the entire second half. But Penn State really could not do anything to stop the run. It was the same thing with this Washington game. So you know that the run's working. Why would you get away from that? Why? There's no reason to do so. So shout out to that coaching staff with having a plan and executing that plan at an extremely high level. And listen, Florida State, I know some of you feel some type of way of not being in the playoff, but whether Florida State was in this playoff or not, doesn't change the fact that, Michigan earned this national championship, at least on the field. Now, off of it, I have no idea what the NCAA is going to do. I know it, you know it, we all know it, right? We know that the NCAA is very inconsistent with how it punishes teams. My early indicators say that there might not be any significant punishments. And for those of you that are preying on Michigan's downfall, you probably don't like this news, but don't take my word for it. One of the members of the NCAA said, quote, that Michigan won this national championship fair and square. Do I agree fully with that sentiment? To be honest, not necessarily. I think there needs to be some ramifications to what needs to happen with this Michigan team, and I'm sure it is a factor to why Jim Harbaugh wants to leave for the NFL, right? But I will say this, even if the wins ultimately end up being vacated, it doesn't change the fact that we saw what we saw. We saw Michigan go toe-to-toe with Alabama and out physical Alabama. We saw Michigan go play Washington, and they handled their business against the Washington Huskies. So, Michigan fans, I'm sure you're not complaining, and it hurts me to say this as someone that is an actual Ohio sports fan. You could see that right there. I grew up watching Ohio State, and I've also support Cincinnati. I am in that minority. I know that it is what it is. But congrats to Michigan for winning a national championship. Next year, our college football playoff, it's going to look a lot different. The path to the national championship is going to look significantly different. Instead of having that 4-team playoff that we've been used to seeing for the last decade plus, we're going to have 12 teams from here on out. And we're going to see teams get some automatic bids. Now, whether it's the 5 autos plus 7 at-larges or the 6 and 6, we'll have to wait and see. Right now, it is at 6 and 6, but there is an indication in light of the Pac-12 essentially folding that they would switch to a 5 and 7. So we'll see what happens from here on out, but it doesn't change the fact that I think Washington is going to be fine. I think they have their coach in Kevin DeBoer. If he doesn't take that Alabama job, I think Washington is going to be a very good addition to the Big Ten in 2024. And I feel like this will not be the last that we see Washington be in that hunt for a national championship. I just kind of have that feeling with the way that that culture is really starting to come together over Kevin DeBoer. But unfortunately, all of the games for that 2023 season into 2024, it comes to an end. All good things come to an end. So all of the games have officially been played. We've seen it happen right before our eyes. We saw the entirety of the 2023-2024 season. Now, something that I haven't done in a while is I haven't shown you guys my power ratings. Now, I want to point out that these are power ratings, not power rankings. Well, what's the difference? The difference is that this is not how I would go about ranking these teams, and I'll go into more detail about that because I know there's that AP poll, and we'll get to that later. But going back to our power ratings, what my power ratings try to ask themselves is, okay, if you have two teams based on their current body of work and based off of, some other factors, who would be favored over whom on a neutral side field? If you take home stadiums out of it and you take and count their entire, body of work. And it's also expectation based, right? So let's say you're a 20-point favorite and you win by 30, you would be rewarded in my power rating model. But let's say you're, say, a 40-point favorite and you only win by 20. You would actually be punished in the model because you didn't win as much as what you're expected to win by. So, hope that makes sense. And without further ado, we do have quite a bit of muscle movement, but mainly in the bottom half of this any given Saturday, top 25. So, we're going to be like Drake. We're going to start from the bottom and work our way up to the very top. We are going to start with 25 through 21. And right away, we see quite a few changes. We had 5 new teams enter the any given Saturday top 25, dating back to before the beginning of bowl season, right after conference championships, to now the conclusion of conference championship weekend. And starting at number 25, we got Maryland. Maryland's going to sneak in here at number 25 to end the season. They were in a January bowl game. They did, not January, but they were in a late December bowl game. They were in the Music City Bowl against Auburn. Maryland looked very good against Auburn. Maryland won 31-13. It was a game that I thought Auburn was going to win. And not only did Auburn fail to win, Maryland looked very impressive in their game against Auburn in that Music City Bowl. So, based off of that performance, they did sneak in here at number 25 in my any given Saturday rankings. On the flip side of that, though, we had Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M was ranked in the top 20 going into bowl season. They're still in here, but they moved down 7 spots. They're down to number 24. Texas A&M played in the Texas Bowl, played a ranked Oklahoma State squad. And even though Oklahoma State was ranked, the betting markets actually had Texas A&M favored for a long time. And that didn't come to fruition either. So Texas A&M, they lose in the Texas Bowl to Oklahoma State. They, of course, get dinged for that, even though Texas A&M was not necessarily at full strength. So that's why they're there at number 24. NC State lost to Kansas State, but they held their own in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Duke in their bowl game against Troy. Did not expect Duke to win, to be honest, with the absence of Riley Leonard, as well as some other opt-outs. I thought this was a really good opportunity for Troy to really cement themselves as one of the best group of 5 teams in the country. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. Duke not only exceeding expectations, but winning outright against Troy in a defensive struggle. I believe it was 17-10, that final score. So shout out to the Duke Blue Devils. We did rank them number 22 in our final power rating model of this season. And then rounding out this group, you have Virginia Tech at 21, who had a big win against Tulane in the Military Bowl. Really good second half for Virginia Tech. Could be one of those dark horses to possibly compete for the ACC with how strong Virginia Tech was in that second half of the season. Now, we'll keep it moving, and we're going to go into the top 20. And in this top 20, there is a couple of other major muscle movements, right? So, Ole Miss was actually pretty down on in our model because even though they finished 10-2 in the regular season, we saw them play against Alabama. We saw them play against Georgia. And not only did they lose in both of those games, but they did not look good in either of those games. They get blown out. So Ole Miss gets hurt heavily, but they are back in this top 25. And the reason why they're back into this top 25, they got a big win against Penn State. And Penn State had most of their offensive weapons intact. Nittany Lions had one of the best defenses in the entire country. Ole Miss embarrasses them in their bowl game. Ole Miss wins convincingly. So we got back to our right ways. We have Ole Miss as number 19. Maybe not as good as maybe a little bit more down than most of you would have Ole Miss. And we would certainly rank Ole Miss if we were actually ranking them. But in our power ratings, we do have Ole Miss at 19. Then Florida State. Listen, it was clear that Florida State was really not the same team that we saw for most of the season. And unfortunately, those key injuries happen. And Florida State, still working on building that depth. Florida State doesn't have that same depth as some of the other blue bloods in college football. But we know that Mike Norvell is the guy. Mike Norvell is the right man for the job at Florida State. Again, could be someone to watch out for that Alabama job. You really never know in this wild world of college football at this point. But Florida State, we did move them down 9 spots. And a big reason was because of that Orange Bowl performance. Yes, they had some opt-outs. But you could argue that at least their backups or their third-string guys were at least just as good as some of the non-conference opponents that Georgia went up against, like Ball State, Tennessee Martin is another example. Neither of those teams got blown out the same way that Florida State got blown out. It was embarrassing. You absolutely hate to see it. And it really killed a lot of sympathy that many college football fans had for Florida State. Because if it was at least a competitive game or Florida State won outright, at least you could argue that Florida State really deserved to belong. But losing by 60 points just doesn't do it. You lose sympathy with a lot of people when you do that. So it is what it is. But Florida State still had an excellent season of going 13-1. We ended up ranking them number 16 in spite of that Orange Bowl performance. Now, going into the top 15, we have Tennessee, a team that was also not ranked in our power rating model. But Tennessee kicks out Iowa. Iowa was ranked going into bowl season. That's not the case because Tennessee makes do of the Iowa defense. Granted, Iowa's offense consistently shot itself in the foot. We had a chance at Iowa offensive touchdown and intercepted in the end zone. So Tennessee makes quick work of Iowa, and so we moved them into our top 15. We have them ranked number 15 in the country. And then you see the other teams that are in this top 15, including Washington, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Alabama. Alabama had some close calls, but we would rank Alabama if we were ranking these teams. Again, these are power ratings. So that being said, here's a quick look at the top 10. Top 10, you got LSU, who won the Reliant Quest Bowl. Kansas State at 9, who won the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Penn State at number 8, they lost to Ole Miss in their bowl game. And Ohio State also lost to Missouri, but those are two very good teams. Arizona, is Arizona a dark horse to make the playoff next year? I think that should be a conversation that really could be had for 2024, given how effective Arizona was this season. The Big 12, at least the new Big 12 environment, is certainly navigatable. You don't have to worry about Texas. You don't have to worry about Oklahoma. You don't have to, at this point, worry about anyone that has a blue chip ratio of over 50%. So Arizona honestly could be a dark horse contender to make it into the college football playoff. And I haven't really seen that talked about enough. So keep it on the Arizona Wildcats. They had an amazing season. We have them ranked at 6. And then you got your top 5. Texas lost to Washington in the Sugar Bowl. Notre Dame won big in the Sun Bowl. Michigan, of course, is your national championship. But I would say that if there might be two other teams that even today would probably be favored over Michigan. Oregon, who had two close losses to Washington, but that was when Michael Penix had amazing games both times around. Then the Georgia Bulldogs got a big boost from that Orange Bowl victory. But I do want to point out that even though these power ratings give an idea of who would be favored over whom on a neutral side field, it doesn't replace the actual results on the field. So Georgia fans aren't completely wrong when they say that they would be favored over any team in the country today. They're not necessarily wrong in that, in my opinion, but you had a chance to prove that you're a college football playoff team. It's called the SEC Championship. It basically was treated like a quarterfinal matchup between Georgia and Alabama. Alabama won, so to keep it in terms of the 12-team field that's coming next year, Georgia, you were knocked out in quarterfinals. Sucks to sucks, but you certainly had your fair share of chances. And for the first time in 3 years, the Bulldogs are not going to be your national champion. But let me know down in the comments section what you think of this final top 25. Do you think a team is too high, too low? Any other grievances? We'd love to hear your opinion about the Any Given Saturday top 25 power ratings. Definitely let me know down in that comment section. While I'm thinking about the comment section, while we're in this period where we have to go longer than usual for the next college football game to happen. As the recording of this podcast on the 11th, we are 226 days away from the opening of the 2024-2025 college football season. So I mentioned all this this is a great time where I want to hear back from you to people of all things. So if there is a question that you want me to ask that is college football related, definitely let me know down in that comment section as well. I would love to treat some of these podcasts over the next 6 months or so as an opportunity to really have more of that mailbag kind of solicitation and discussion. I would deeply enjoy that. And, I get to hear from you guys as well. I do read all my comments. I would truly appreciate that if that's, something that you would certainly be interested in. Man, I need some water. And man, we also run across the final AP poll. This was released the day after that national championship game. This was found by On Free Sports. So I'm gonna put it up on screen right now. This is what the final top 25 did end up looking like. Okay, so there's some decisions that were made that I was pretty curious about. So top three, I don't have a problem with the top three, right? Michigan should be number one. They won a national championship. Washington was in that national championship, so that makes sense that they're two. Texas lost in the semifinals, as did Alabama, so it makes sense that Texas is ranked ahead of Alabama. But my thing is, why is Georgia ranked ahead of Alabama? Legitimately, what are we doing, people? Because we saw those two play on the field in the SEC championship. Alabama won fair and squared, and Alabama won. They went to overtime with the team that won the national championship. So why is Alabama ranked behind Georgia? I really genuinely do not understand that. Now, if you want to put Georgia at 5, I'm cool with that because Georgia did have a big time performance in that Orange Bowl. We got it. It makes some sense to me, right? But that was really puzzling when I first saw that. And then just looking down on this list, Oregon and Florida State, they were technically tied for 6. I would have Oregon ahead of Florida State outright because of how Oregon dominated in the Fiesta Bowl, while Florida State, well, we knew what happened in that Orange Bowl as well. Missouri, Ole Miss, and Ohio State at 8 through 10, really 8 through 14. I'm really really cool. I'm cool with all of that. I'm honestly in. I don't really have an issue with 8 through 14. That does make enough sense to me. Um, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, they have 15 and 16, but Oklahoma State beat Oklahoma on the field. Um, what? So in the Bedlam game, Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma, but Oklahoma State, which by the way, they won their bowl game. Oklahoma didn't. They lose to Arizona. Oklahoma is still ahead of Oklahoma State. So kind of the same principle of the Georgia Alabama argument that I had earlier. Why are we doing that? Genuinely, why are we going about doing that? I'm genuinely not sure. Kansas State moves up from number 25 up to number 18. That makes sense to me. Louisville moves down 4 spots after the loss to USC. That makes sense. Clemson moves up a couple of spots. Okay, whatever. North Carolina State moving down a few spots. SMU. Why? Why is SMU at 20? Respectfully, why? Um, so SMU comes into the bowl season at number 24 in the country, at least in the college football playoff poll. Um, so they were barely ranked, but SMU loses to an average at best Boston College team. And when SMU was heavily favored, they were favored by at some points close to 2 touchdowns. Why is SMU moved up a couple of spots? I don't get it, man. I truly don't get it with some of these AP voters. And it goes to show that, unfortunately, there is an alarming number of AP voters and Heisman voters and other award winners that vote on these things that don't really pay attention to college football all that closely. So you hate to see it. Kansas being ranked, we're cool with that. Iowa still being ranked, that's fine because they did win double-digit games. Liberty. So Liberty came in at number 23. They got blown out. And to be honest with you, I would not have Liberty here in this top 25. I'd probably, me personally, be looking at maybe a couple of other teams that should really be in discussion. What about Oh, what are we looking for? I mean, USC could have an argument. Air Force had a good season. If you wanted to go, and so did UTSA, by the way, and Fresno State. If you really wanted to go the Group of 5 route, but what about West Virginia? West Virginia went 9-4 this year. They won the Duke Mayo's Bowl against North Carolina. Where's West Virginia in all this? What are we doing? Overall, it's a solid poll. I'm fine with it. I do certainly have my disagreements, but again, like I definitely want to hear what you guys think about this AP poll. I'm sure we're definitely in line. If I was an AP voter, instead of having Liberty personally, I would replace Liberty with West Virginia. Other than a couple of other changes, I'm cool with, but yeah, I feel like West Virginia kind of got chipped here. I know Liberty only lost 1 game, but come on, man. Liberty had literally the worst strength of schedule in the entire country, man. Like, come on, y'all. We gotta be better than that, man. Honestly, we truly do. Um, so I'm gonna get off that soapbox before I get more riled up about the about that AP poll. It is what it is. So another reason why I don't like to use that O word that some other people like to throw out there. So a big one for me is that we have a lot of news happening, even if there isn't games happening on the field yes necessarily. And we saw that with the Nick Saban retirement. That was a massive deal that's going to have a huge ripple effect on college football in the near future. But also happening at the same time is that in the transfer portal is has literally been on fire. We have a lot of new players that are blue chip recruits or former blue chip recruits that have found destinations. I mean, just going back to guys that have originally entered on December 27th in the transfer portal. And I'll try to go as quick as possible because I'm going to let you know right now. We have a lot of a lot of people making announcements that are pretty big deals. So buckle up, Buttercup, because it's going to be spicy. So starting with December 27th, Braxton Myers. He's a safety at Purdue, former four-star guy. Uh, thing about him, he originally committed to Ole Miss, but then he flipped his commitment from Ole Miss to Purdue. So before he even steps on campus his first year, he technically already has transferred one time. Whole football season happens. Braxton Myers doesn't really play over the course of the season. He ends up entering in the transfer portal on the 27th, and he does find a home. He's going to Southern Miss. Really big pickup for the Eagles, getting a really talented player from this class of 2023. He was a true freshman, guys, so he still has 4 years of eligibility remaining. So happy for Braxton Myers going down to the group of 5 to possibly get playing time. Now, as for some other December 27th entries, got Jaquinton Jackson and Panay Boone. Both of them are running backs, but at different schools. One is Jaquinton Jackson, running back out of Utah. He is transferring to Arkansas, and this is a very good pickup in that backfield for the Razorbacks. This is a guy that actually did appear in 12 games this season, ran for nearly 800 yards. I believe he had 850 scrimmage yards on the year, had 4 touchdowns, was a good contributor on the Utah offense this year. Utah offense that was down in light of Cam Rising being hurt for the entire year. So I think this is a really good pickup for Jaquinton Jackson. Tough player. Love the pickup here for the Arkansas Razorbacks. Meanwhile, Panay Boone, another running back, but is at Toledo. He's going to Louisville. And Panay Boone, he was killing it at Toledo this year, man. He ran for 1,400 yards, and he had 16 total touchdowns. Not to mention he showed those hands as well, 15 catches, 219 yards as well. This is going to be his last year of eligibility. He will not have any more eligibility after next season. We're starting to get to the point where the players coming in do not have that extra year of COVID. We're starting to filter all of those players out. So Panay Boone going to Louisville should be someone that should be in the mix to start at Louisville. Good pickup here for the Louisville Cardinals. Now, for the 28th, Cameron Calhoun entered the transfer portal, and he entered in the transfer portal before Michigan even played in their first semifinal game. This was a few days before that. Cameron Calhoun, for all intents and purposes, did not make much of an impact on this national championship team. And it's why he's been downgraded from being a 4-star player when he was in high school, why he is now a 3-star player now that he's going through the transfer portal process. He did appear in a couple of games in the Bowling Green game and in the UNLV game as well, but he's going to go to Utah to see if he can find some playing time over there. So a little bit of well, not necessarily a lateral move. It's technically a lateral move because it's P5 to P5, but Michigan taking out a little bit higher as a program than Utah, though Utah is a pretty good program as well. Just to see how Cameron Calhoun does next season, see if he actually gets more playing time or not. Now, going over to the 29th, I told you, it's a lot here, you guys. 29th, while we're thinking about Louisville, we saw them pick up a running back, but a couple days later, one of their linebackers entered the transfer portal, Keith Brown. He's a former 4-star guy. Granted, he did not play much this year. He only played in 5 games this year. And in the 5 games he was in, he really wasn't an impact on the stat sheets, right? He only recorded an assisted tackle. That's it. He didn't have any tackles of his own in the limited playing time that he had. He does have 1 more year of eligibility, though. He's going to go down to Washington State. That's really where Keith Brown is going to go to. So the Cougars do get a nice pickup. See if they can get more out of Keith Brown than what he had out of Louisville. After that, we got Jaden Hill. Jaden Hill is going to be someone that could make a little bit of a name for himself at Texas A&M. He's going to be there as a grad transfer, but while he's listed as a 4-star guy initially, he's been downgraded to 3 stars. And I was a little puzzled by why 247 Sports. This is where I'm getting this information from, by the way. They're really good about tracking the transfer portal, by the way. If you're interested in these transfer portal moves. So Jaden Hill played in all 12 games and actually had solid production. While he didn't have any interceptions, he had multiple sacks, a few pass breakups, fumble recovery too. Jaden Hill, I think he's a better player than what 247 Sports gives credit for. And so I think this is a sneaky good pickup for Texas A&M, realizing that last year of eligibility that Jaden Hill has. Now, speaking of corners, keeping it in the cornerback room, Cam Alexander from UTSA, he was in that transfer portal. And you want to talk about Cam Alexander really making a name for himself. When he was in high school, he didn't have any stars to his name. He was unranked on 247 Sports. But through sheer hard work and determination, we do end up seeing Cam Alexander really mold himself into that 4-star player, right? He's going to go to Oregon. They're getting a dude there, man. Cam Alexander, 2 interceptions this year, 15 pass breakups. The kid can absolutely play. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Now, going back to December 31st, and we kind of talked about this person already. Well, actually, no. Never mind. I'm thinking of a different person. We'll go to January 1st yet. The guys that enter on January 1st. Couple linebackers here. Demetrius Knight. He was a 3-star player at Charlotte. He's been upgraded to 4 stars on 247 Sports in light of him entering the transfer portal. This is a year in which we really saw Charlotte struggle, but Demetrius Knight was a bright spot on that team, though. This is a year where Demetrius Knight had nearly 100 tackles, 3 interceptions. Shoot, he even had a defensive touchdown as well. Dude, the ball player in South Carolina is going to get him for his final year of eligibility, so that maybe he could play a little bit more relevant football in the month of January, right? But speaking of linebackers, though, we have a P5 linebacker going down to the group of 5 level. Noah Zeiger out of Notre Dame. He's been at Notre Dame for a couple of years and honestly hasn't really been able to get consistent playing time. He's only appeared in 3 games this year and he just wants to get some more playing time. So Noah Zeiger, he's going to go down and play at Central Michigan. So I think that's a good move for him for the sake of him actually having an opportunity to see the field. But not every transfer portal decision, I believe, is a great decision, right? We talked about Javen Maliva on the previous podcast. And when I saw him in the transfer portal, I thought it would make sense to really go to a school like UCLA with Dante Moore entering the transfer portal. But he did make his decision. He's going to an LA school, but it's not going to be a UCLA. It's going to go to USC. So it's an interesting decision. It's not a decision that I would have made personally because Miller Moss is there. He just threw 6 touchdowns in the bowl game. So it's no sure thing that Jane Maliva is going to start, even though he does have starting quarterback experience more than Miller Moss. I just don't know if that's the right decision for him personally, but do wish him the best of luck. Blake Hornsby, however, he's listed at quarterback at Texas State. This is going to be his second time that he transfers. Actually, he's going to Arkansas State. He appeared in 7 games this year, but not at the quarterback positions. This is mainly to run the ball and catch balls. He's going to make the transition over to wide receiver or running back. So good on him for trying to increase his odds of going to the NFL. I think he has the tools to be a good receiver because he already has the experience anyways. We'll see if Arkansas State can get more out of him. Speaking of, and then we also have Tony Grimes, corner out of Texas A&M. He's been downgraded from a 4-star to a 3-star. That's easy to see why. This is a guy that is a junior redshirt, didn't play at all at Texas A&M, is going to transfer over to Michigan State. Also only has 1 year of eligibility, but Tony Grimes, a former blue chip player, will be going to the Spartans. Keeping it in that defensive side of the ball, Dane McCullough, the safety out of Oklahoma. He was also a guy that was downgraded to 3 stars, but honestly, for me, I would have capped it as a 4 star because Dane McCullough actually did see the field. He ended up with 30 tackles, 3.5 TFLs, a few pass breakups on top of that as well, and he did also have 10 games played. Keeping it going, though, got Scooby Williams, the edge rusher out of Florida. He's going to transfer to Texas A&M. He played in all 12 games for the Florida Gators this year and made a decent impact. 4 TFLs, a sack, 2 forced fumbles as well. Some good pickup there for the Aggies. One big move for the group of 5, though, is Caden Salter. Caden Salter did enter the transfer portal, but after consideration, he's actually going to stay at Liberty. So that's big to have their quarterback coming back. And he was excellent for Liberty. 32 passing touchdowns, only 6 interceptions. This is one of the more dynamic quarterbacks in the group of 5. And with that being said, with this new college football playoff format, gives Liberty a fighting chance to possibly be in that college football playoff when next season comes around. As for a couple of other guys that are coming around, Yam Banks. We talked about him previously, the safety out of South Alabama. He's going to be crystal balled to Ole Miss. That'll be huge for their defense. Little surprised that he's going to Ole Miss. I thought like Mississippi State would get in there, given they had a Sun Belt coach. But right now, crystal ball to Ole Miss, nothing guaranteed. As for Tamoya DOJ, I'm pretty sure I butchered that. If anyone's familiar with this player, any of you West Virginia fans, let me know how I pronounce his name down in the comments. That would be really much appreciated. Played in 13 games, including that bowl game in the Duke Mayo. Made 3.5 sacks in 13 games. This is a good player, and Florida State is going to be very lucky to have him. She'll be someone that should contribute for that Florida State squad. And this is also around the time. This is also like the January 3rd people that made updates on 247 Sports. This is also a time where we saw a slew of Alabama transfers, right? So it makes you wonder if the team was informed that he was going to retire before the other sports media retired. Because right now there's a total of 20 people on the Alabama team that has already entered the transfer portal, and that was before the news of Nick Saban retiring. Which, speaking of Nick Saban retiring, going back to that real quick, if your coach leaves the program, you are given a free transfer. So, could be open season on Alabama's roster. So, the quicker that Alabama does get their coach in, the better. But slew of Alabama transfers. Eli Holsting, backup quarterback, downgraded to 3 stars, didn't play last year, but is going to Pitt in search of more playing time. Monkel Goodwin, a defensive lineman. He's going to South Carolina with a couple of years of eligibility left. He didn't record any stats, but he did appear in a couple of games. Speaking of players that did actually play, though, Malik Benson, wide receiver, going to Florida State. So the Seminoles upgrading their wide receiver room, trying to replace Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman. Terrence Ferguson and Seth McClellan, both interior offensive linemen, both played in the college football playoff, started in it. Both of them are gone. Terrence Ferguson, he's going to be crystal ball to Florida State. Seth McClellan transferring to Ohio State. That's a big pickup for the Buckeyes, as long as they don't have him actually snap the ball. Kristen Story, he's a safety. He's going to Kentucky. And then Earl Little Jr., he's a corner. He's also transferring to Florida State. So a lot of bigger pieces on Alabama's roster leaving. So we'll see if there's more additions in the transfer portal for Alabama as we continue this longer period of time. And before we get into the actual signing day, we saw early signing day. We're getting into actual signing day now. Few more guys of note, and then we'll get off that transfer portal updates. Cole Martin of Oregon. He played in all 14 games for Oregon this year. He's going to Arizona State. I was a little puzzled by this move because Oregon obviously in a better state right now than Arizona State. So I don't know if Arizona State magically offered more NIL money. I'm not sure what's going on with Cole Martin. I was just really intrigued by that because this is a guy that played in all 14 games. He's getting playing time. So really confused by that. We do have one of Caden Salter's receivers in here as well from Liberty. Has not made a decision yet, but if I were him, I would definitely look at Georgia Tech. That's a program that's on the rise, and they have not brought a wide receiver in yet in the transfer portal. Also, keep an eye out for Miami, North Carolina, Wake Forest, Clemson, possibly Alabama with Malik Benson and a few others leaving on in that receiving room. Okay, but rounding it out, Jalen Gerth, offensive tackle at Houston. He's going to transfer to UTSA. He played in 8 games this year and has 3 years of eligibility remaining. Can never have too many good offensive linemen. And the last person of note for right now is Jam Griffin, the former 4-star player out of Ole Miss. He transferred to Oregon State and played in 12 games, but was really a primary backup for Quentin Johnson. Thought maybe Jam Griffin would stay with Quentin Johnson going to Ohio State in the transfer portal, but is also going out the door as well. So that rounds out your transfer portal as well. I'm sure we will have a lot more coming up in the next few months. But hey, that's just what makes things interesting here in this longer period of time between now and the end of the start of the next college football season, at least on the field. One last thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'm sure it might have fallen a little bit in between the cracks with everything that has gone on recently, is we do have some of the nominations for the College Football Hall of Fame. Now, if you guys haven't been to the College Football Hall of Fame, it's down in Atlanta, Georgia. Highly recommend going. It was a really good experience. I personally went there last year, and it was an extremely good time. Now, there were a total of, I believe it was 19 total nominees between coaches and players, but certainly a few people of note that I definitely wanted to highlight because they were players that I specifically remember growing up. First, got to give the flowers to Mark D'Antonio. He was the head coach at Cincinnati, but more importantly, more notably, he's the head coach at Michigan State. Took Michigan State Spartans to the college football playoff. Took them to heights that really have not been experienced before. So Mark D'Antonio actually had Michigan State competing for a national championship, which is crazy to think about. So congratulations to Mark D'Antonio. There was another coach in here, Frank Solich, coached a few years at Nebraska, but spent a lot of time at Ohio. Coached at Ohio for almost actually at least 15 years. So Frank Solich had a really good career at Ohio, had Ohio consistently in the hunt for MAC championships during his time at Ohio University in Athens. So definitely love that he's in the College Football Hall of Fame now. Few other players that I actually do remember and recognize. Justin Blackmon, the former wide receiver from Oklahoma State, ended up being the 5th overall pick by the Jacksonville Jaguars back in 2012. While he didn't have that stellar career in the pros, in college, dude was that guy. He had over 1,500 yards 2 consecutive years. Bro had 41 career touchdowns in 3 seasons. Declared for the NFL after his junior campaign, he was a problem. He was an absolute problem. And yeah, he was that type of guy. Congratulations to Justin Blackmon. But someone who arguably had the best hands in pro football history, at least modern pro football history, Larry Fitzgerald. Everyone remembers Larry Fitzgerald in the NFL and how it just seems like he never dropped a pass. Never dropped a pass. I think I saw a crazy stat where he had more touchdowns than drops in his career, which is absolutely insane to think about. But at Pitt. He was really good at Pitt as well. After he was redshirted his freshman year, 2002 and 2003, dude was on a tear. He had 34 touchdowns in 2 years. He had over 2,600 yards on scrimmage in those 2 years. And this was also a time when the Big East Conference also existed, by the way, which is, you only think of them as a basketball only conference, but there was a time where the Big East was playing relevant football. It was a conference that actually used to have a automatic berth to like the what we call now the New Year's Six Bowls. So really love to see Larry Fitz in the Hall of Fame. Randy Moss is in the College Football Hall of Fame. So sportsreference.com, that's usually where I go to like for a lot of these like older players in case you're interested. So Randy Moss actually oversaw the transition of Marshall going from FCS football all the way up to like the higher echelon of Division I football. So Marshall was in the MAC in the late 1990s, and in the 1 year that Marshall was in the MAC with Randy Moss, unstoppable. 25 touchdowns in a season. 25. And it still wasn't enough to win the Heisman. He finished fourth in the Heisman Trophy race. Ends up having, an excellent career in the NFL. Love to see that from Randy Moss. An electric football player. Julius Peppers, can't be the same about him. Also going to be inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. Had 5 career interceptions. I think that was an underrated part of his game for a defensive lineman, right? That is crazy to think about. Was in college for 3 years at North Carolina. Ends up finishing 10th in 2001 for the Heisman Trophy. We're talking about a defensive player. Ends up going on and being that number 2 overall pick by the Carolina Panthers in the 2002 NFL Draft. And then last person that I remember specifically is Alex Smith. Alex Smith, we talked about, a lot of people talk about, his early struggles in the NFL. And then Jim Harbaugh, who's now the coach of Michigan, really help him find his NFL footing eventually before he gets traded to Kansas City and, had a solid career. But what made him the number 1 overall pick was the type of season that he had at Utah. And I think this was when Urban Meyer was the coach at the time too. But in Alex Smith's final year, he threw for nearly 3,000 yards, 32 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. This was an exceptional football player at the University of Utah. And this was back when Utah was in the Mountain West, really put Utah football on the map initially. He ends up finishing 4th in the Heisman Trophy race ultimately. Heck of a football player. And I just wanted to give my flowers to all of those guys because those are guys that I specifically remember watching growing up. And one more thing while I'm thinking about it, Armani Edwards, quarterback at Appalachian State. He was there from 2006 to 2009. Led Appalachian State to an FCS national championship and also created one of the biggest upsets in modern college football history when Appalachian State went into the Big House and beat Michigan. But, I'm sure Michigan fans, are happy that times are a lot better for them now than it was in 2007. But definitely wanted to give all of those guys their flowers. Definitely loved that they are included in the College Football Hall of Fame. I'm sure we are not too far away from seeing Nick Saban being a part of that illustrious group because he absolutely deserves it. So that's going to wrap things up here for tonight. My voice is starting to die out. We end up going a little bit more than an hour. So really excited to do that, even though there isn't many games happening on the field right now. Hoping to keep that going. We won't be as active on here over the next 5 to 6 months. We'll kind of be touch and go as we can with the fact that, there's not as much going on. There's still stuff happening. And when stuff does happen, best believe your boy's going to be here and let you know I'm a man of the people after all. At least I try to be. If you did enjoy this podcast, though, first of all, thank you so much for making it to the end. You're the real MVP if you did that. And if you are the real MVPs do a couple of things. You hit that like button. That's one way that you can show that, hey, you're the real MVP. And then also, if you're brand new to the channel, I would love you to join this college football community that we're trying to create. I'm trying to create a college football community that is not afraid to really talk about any college football topic, whether it is, the upper echelons of college football or, like down under with like Conference USA, Mountain West. I try not to discriminate because all football is good football, in my opinion. I really truly do believe that. I'm really excited for that next college football season come around. But hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you hit that like button and subscribe button if you have to be brand new. I'm your host, Jake, and I'm going to sign off for tonight. But hope you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.